Hello, 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 hello. Welcome to the Medium is the Message. I'm Sam Frank. I'm on the board of the Urbit Foundation, and I do some other stuff. To my left is Lee Moyer, filmmaker. Has a production company, but has made, that's coming soon. She may or may not talk about, and has made 2 movies, TFW No GF, which some people describe as being about incels. I describe maybe as being about groypers. I don't know, maybe something else.
Groypers.
And Alex's War, which is screening tonight. Walter Kirn, a writer and adventurer. Katherine Dee, default friend, has a Substack, knows about TikTok and Tumblr and subcultures. And Noah Kumin, editor of Mars Review of Books, writing also a book about Urbit on Urbit, has a novel somewhere in the works. And Walter wanted to begin, so I will give him the stage.
Yeah, I'm going to beat you into submission with a story, and I'm going to use my loudest voice because I believe you all should hear it. As you know or may not know, Tlan is a fictional planet invented by the Argentinian writer Jorge Luis Borges. Many who study or read Borges think of him as an advocate of sort of infinite paradox and the myriad illusions that are life. But there was, in fact, a Jorge Luis Borges. He did exist, and I met him, and I'm going to tell you the story of that meeting as a way of baptizing Urbit with the presence of one who has been in the presence of the person who gave Curtis Yarvin the idea for the language and for the metaphor that is Urbit. So in 1985, I was at Oxford University. I was younger than all of you, and I saw a little note card in our guardhouse. Oxford colleges are walled. It said, Jorge Luis Borges would like to meet students interested in English literature at 4 p.m. in room 405. And I ran to the room because it was 10 to 4. And I wasn't aware that Senor Borges was still alive. I was barely aware that he had ever lived. I mean, it was like meeting Shakespeare and getting to talk to him about English literature. Ran to this room, sat down. There were 4 other people there. That was the level of interest in meeting this godlike writer at Oxford University. A nurse came in, leading a man who looked like an inchworm from the Alice in Wonderland books. He had on dark glasses, sort of wraparound glaucoma glasses. He was blind, if you know. She led him to a chair. He sat down in front of his 4 adoring students and said, "What would you like to know?" This was a man who in his 80s had translated Milton, Shakespeare, all the great English writers into Portuguese, who was as close to a truly legendary literary god on earth as existed at that time. Samuel Beckett was still alive, maybe his only rival. And he asked us what we'd like to know, and there was, of course, deafening silence. And so when he saw that we were too shy to ask him a question, he said, "Well, let me do something for you. As I was on the plane over the Atlantic, I indulged a hobby of mine, which is improving on the works of Shakespeare." And he recited a speech from King Lear that ends, "No, no, no, no." And he said, now, of course, as students of literature, you realize that there are one too few no's in that sentence. It can be improved. And so he said, let me give you my version. This is what I do in my spare time. You and I, read Sex Magazine or the Mars Review of Books, and Borges rewrites Shakespearean masterpieces. And he then gave the speech again, and he said, no, 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 no. And it was obvious to all of us that Shakespeare was merely a man, and that Borges, another man, had improved him. That it was possible to improve on Shakespeare was the moral of that story. And if you remember the story that includes Tlan, in that imaginary planet, in that imaginary civilization, everyone who recites Shakespeare or speaks a Shakespearean line is Shakespeare. And so what I give to you here, besides the fact that I have touched Mr. Borges, and if you shake my hand, you will have touched someone who's touched him, line forms at the left, is that the internet itself, the entire complex of technical and engineering and cultural artifacts that is the internet, can be improved on by mere mortals. We can add that extra no. We can revise and bring forward something that seems almost impersonal, just as Shakespeare did to me before I realized that an old Argentinian man had made him better on a plane flight between America and England. That's it.
Well, this is, of course, as it must be, perfect for what I want to talk about today. You know, there's a sense we have that Shakespeare lived, Shakespeare died, will never be as good as Shakespeare. Nothing will ever be, no culture will ever be that good, and we've resigned to decline for the heat death of culture. Heat death of subculture, the heat death of high culture. I'm interested in what are the conditions, technical and otherwise, that would one day, you know, kick Shakespeare's ass, like allow us to, you know, do culture better, you know, in a broad sense, you know, where everyone is writing Shakespeare, rewriting Shakespeare, and writing their own that makes Shakespeare look like Lin-Manuel Miranda, my high school classmate. So this is what I kind of want to talk about. Like I have a sense that subculture and culture, ideas, new memes, but like are generated in private, in secret, and incubate, and then find their way into the world. And how might this happen? How might Urbit be a technical substrate, a network of networks, a subculture of subcultures, to begin to generate something, a world that would be beautiful? I'll begin with Noah, and we can come back down this way.
Sure. Thanks, Sam. Well, when I was preparing for this talk, I was going back and taking a look at McLuhan. The name of this talk is "The Medium is the Message," and I was surprised to learn that when he wrote that essay, when he said the medium is the message, he was talking about scale. You know, so when we look at the way these technologies are changing human behavior, you know, we're not talking about bioengineering, maybe for a couple people in the audience, but mostly not yet. We're talking about human nature and how humans interact with each other at scale. And now with digital networks, we've got a scale, you know, as large as the number of people on Earth potentially, and that really affects the way that people interact with one another. You can just look at Twitter. Twitter, you know, some people here are talented on Twitter, and it's a great skill. Twitter obviously selects for certain ways of behaving, right? Something polarizing is good on Twitter. Leaning into the current thing is good on Twitter. And that's because, you know, basically you're competing for 1 billion shallow eyes instead of maybe 1,000 deep eyes. So I think when you talk about, Sam, like how do we get to, well, I don't know how we produce a new Shakespeare, but let's say if we want to create the conditions for one, we need to be thinking about smaller scales. And And because the digital has overtaken the physical, that's going to have to start with a digital solution, in my opinion. And in my opinion, that's Urbit.
I mean, Katherine, you have written a fair amount about the kind of memes that came out of the hothouse of Tumblr. And I know you spend time on TikTok, and there's a sense that like the cultures produced by these are somewhat perverse and contorted. So I'm curious how you see the question through the lens of these technologies or websites or apps that you've looked at, and also more broadly.
If you want someone to care about literature, if you really want to produce the next Shakespeare, you need to take people offline. I agree with Noah, right? It is an issue of scale. But I mean, people are so impatient, they're not going to want to use Urbit, to be frank. So if Urbit is all that people have the opportunity to use, then maybe we will create Shakespeare's, because you may as well read a book.
I guess I'm still struggling to grasp how to talk on this panel, to be clear, because I mean, my understanding of Urbit is like about a few days old. I'm interested in it. I'm interested in learning more about it, but I also don't understand the question of why we need another William Shakespeare. We've already got a William Shakespeare. And in William Shakespeare's world, he had plenty of his own obstacles to contend with that didn't have to do with the free flow of information. They probably had more to do with just like, sanitary food sources, things like that. I don't know why we always need to be looking back and comparing what we're doing in the past. Of course, we're doing it out of utility because it's our only touchstone for what we're trying to do in our own lives, but I don't really acknowledge that there's like a major problem that needs to be solved, and we can sit and talk about like how we're gonna solve our problems through technology, but technology is just gonna do what it will with us, and we're just gonna do whatever we're gonna keep doing to add meaning to our own lives. Sorry, I mean...
If anybody has ever visited the site of the Globe Theater where the actual Shakespeare began, and actually remember this, Shakespeare is his Urbit name. We know nothing about the person. He was so famous that everyone forgot to write anything about him in his lifetime. He was known only actually after his death and through a series of republications of his work. So the actual Shakespeare was an anon, so to speak, who grew out of his ownership, because he had a stake in it, of this small theater called the Globe. And it was much smaller than this venue here, and it was in a part of London that gentle people did not go to, sort of the carnival side, the Times Square of London. And he grew from this small stage, where bears were brought on stage in chains, to a lion of English literature. But it's an illusion. He was an Urbit anon when he started. Number two, what does Urbit really offer that the other platforms don't? I've done a lot of thinking about it. You use the word privacy, you use the word secrecy, peer-to-peer. But to me, what it offers is intimacy. It offers, again, the possibility of an intimate internet. And for the artist, that means I no longer need to shoot a confetti cannon at the entire society and hope that my work sprinkles down on the shoulders of some people who are interested in it. I can invite and have a relationship with my readers. I even envision, in a sort of Borgesian way, a novel with only one reader. A novel that is written and intended for an ideal audience of one who is then invited to read it and perhaps talk about it. And perhaps, if she feels moved, pass it on. That's the way culture should move, out from the source. But mass culture and then the internet culture which succeeded it had a whole different idea, which is that we should carpet bomb the land with stuff that most people aren't interested in the hope that 0.505% of them will become fans. And so that is the fashion in which I think Urbit can propel the next Shakespeare, through a chain of intimate connections, each of which has a quality that we don't presently, and grow outward.
Killing it.
Yeah, I'll just say that, I mean, I appreciate when we talk about Urbit, but I appreciate when we don't also. I don't, I'm interested in everyone talking about the stuff they know and like especially like the good experiences they've had online. Like, to me, like I'm 42, I've been in occasionally these internet, news group, mailing list, and it's like good for a month, and then it's not anymore, either through heat death or through getting too popular. Things come and go. It's like, and that's a problem Urbit may or may not be able to solve. Like, how do you maintain, again, subculture, community in a digital space? It's a hard problem that, like, the internet's good at broadcasting, it's good at one-to-one, but, when you get into groups of this, size, smaller, village scale, Dunbar number, it just keeps breaking, and it's so frustrating because you have a good month, it's like, this is fucking awesome, I can't wait to read it, and then it just starts sucking. And so, I mean, like, bringing in your experience of this and you're thinking about this without even reference to Urbit is of interest to me. But Alex, one thing, like, you just made a movie about Alex Jones, and I think I heard you on a podcast saying something like, everything he says is emotionally true to him. Maybe you said something like that, but he's an interesting case because if that's the way he communicates, this is the kind of thing that's safe to do among friends. And if you do it on Infowars.com, it suddenly becomes legally dangerous and threatening and confusing because, the truth value of his claims is obviously open to debate, and unknown in many cases, or might not be known for decades if the aliens come down from the sky or God does and tells us what is actually happening behind the curtain. So I'm kind of curious about how you feel through that. There's something very intimate about the way he communicates that's obviously compelling and also like horrifying to some people, and just and more generally, like it's rare for people to be able to be that emotionally straightforward in public because it's fucking dangerous, because people get offended and sometimes they get fucking sued.
I think what you're referencing is I got into a little bit of a rabbit hole in an interview where I said something to the effect of the content of Alex's words is not really necessarily as important as the way that they make people feel, and that for a lot of people who don't feel at home in the mainstream space and dialogue, and it's actually a highly eclectic group of people, and it's maybe even some people that feel that way subconsciously, is that it's maybe a little bit of a cathartic experience for them to engage with Alex's content. But yeah, he's not. He's existing in the sphere of like the other, as it relates to this conversation, and he's definitely an example of decentralization and what that model looks like.
Katherine, Noah, like, when have you felt at home on the internet? Like, can you tell us a story?
At home on the internet?
For however briefly, yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, I just didn't hear. You want to go first, or?
Sure. I mean, I feel at home in like certain Discord servers and on forums. That intimacy, you need a few things. The status, how people get status, needs to have nothing to do with journalists scraping stories. That's important. The status needs to be confined to the mechanics of the group. There can't be some external status. That's what tends to ruin groups these days, right? Like, you think about the internet pre-2014, right? Before there was internet culture reporting, there was people jockeying for status, but they wanted to be recognized by the coolest person in that universe, and there would be that kind of drama, right? It's a lot different now because being a really powerful Twitter anon, right, who decides one day to show their face, you could then become a real world celebrity, or you could start from that point, right? And that's what destroys, that's a huge destroyer of communities. So I feel at home, and I think we all feel at home, any place that removes that incentive.
I guess I'll say I've never particularly felt at home on the internet. Like, I got into Urbit from the perspective of being a Luddite, not from the perspective of being a developer or for being an accelerationist, from the perspective of being somebody who was working on a novel, which is a pretty lonely thing, and the sort of thing for which maybe you don't want as much outside influence. Maybe you want some time to just be away from whatever the current controversies are and work. So I really tried to not use the internet that much. I didn't have a smartphone, etc. And eventually, you just kind of realize that this isn't going to work. Like, you're not going to defeat these forces by ignoring them. The forces that are propelling us towards having a global digital network are too strong. So that there had to be some kind of third way, and that's how I got into Urbit.
Walter, I mean, you've moved through many media over your career. You've written books, you've had books made into movies, you tweet and you go on TV and talk, you do podcasts with Matt Taibbi and everything in between. And I'm kind of just curious how you've experienced this, the shifts in the media, the whole landscape, over your career and how that's like felt you.
Right. It's important to note that I'm not a boomer. I'm technically a Gen X person. I found out early here last night that this is a very generationally conscious group of people. So I want to distance myself from the evil ones. Listen, in 1990, I wrote a story for GQ about a Berkeley magazine called Mondo 2000. It had an anonymous editor. His name was Are You Serious? He was really a guy named Ken Goffman. The scene around the internet in 1990 in Northern California was people working at odd-named companies that don't exist anymore. Ampex, I don't know if that was... But anyway, in this house in Berkeley where I was writing about the people who were cooking up the global village, there was the same kind of rhetoric, the same sort of optimism, the same sort of intellectual hope that there is here. It's as though I've come full circle to that room in that Berkeley house where everybody was taking acid and expounding on how we were going to link up the world one by one, using the well or whatever the state of the art was, and all get to know each other again. Godzilla's foot came down years later and stomped that whole thing out. That little punk rock internet movement was completely absorbed by the Borg. And here we are again. And I think of Urbit as a sort of conscious medievalism. We're prepared for the Dark Ages, and we also have a strategy for surviving them. And it's going to be monastery to monastery. And we're going to have emissaries who travel between them, speaking a certain language with a certain, dare I say it, elite attitude about themselves. And they will somehow keep alive and even bring forward the culture. Because the world didn't stop in the Middle Ages, despite the fact that we call them dark. No, the preparation for the Renaissance was made. So I guess what I see Urbit as in the large scale over the course of my career is as a conscious reiteration of the original hopes for the internet held by the freaks, trippers, and oddballs who felt at odds with their society in some ways, hoped to invent a fresher version with space for themselves, and were shouldered aside quite rudely by a combination of the national security state, international capital, and other things. And it's my hope that this time we'll get it right.
Alex, when I was in college, I was pretty obsessed with like the story of hardcore in America, hardcore punk in America, and what came after, and it was these like local scenes, you know, people sending zines around and building up a network of distribution and touring, you know, and also as that happened, these local scenes, aesthetics intermingled, and all these things, you know, came out of it, you know, like REM came out of it, Nirvana, but also many other, you know, post-punk bands that are more interesting than them. And it seems to me that, you know, through circumstance and everything else, like right now with your movie, you're also like having to reinvent the wheel with distribution and figure out like how to get this thing about a very popular man into a culture that, you know, is trying to shut the gates. I'm just curious how you kind of are feeling through like this necessity to re-network your distribution, you know, mechanism. You know, there's streaming, there's COVID. I don't know what's happening in the theaters. I've been to one movie in the theater in the past 3 years. It just seems really hard. It also seems like there's great possibility there. I'm just curious how you're feeling about it.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head at the end, which is I think there is a group of people, a small group of people who want you to believe that it's really hard and nobody wants to see this shit and it's a niche thing, and what they're really doing is they're trying to divert your attention from the fact that there's just a insane demand for content that reflects the moment that we're living in, right? So in some ways it's been hard because the models that already exist are not they are opening their arms slowly, because I think that now especially they're starting to recognize that there's money on the table. But the status has been a little bit shaky. We definitely had to go through alternative means to get our projects out there and funded. But you know, where I fit into this picture of being invited to speak at the Urbit conference has a lot to do with the fact that a lot of the allies for my films have been people who are in the crypto community and in the tech community. And that's not something that happened to me by design. That's just sort of the way that the gravity went. So thank you to everybody in these communities for helping to make my films possible. And, you know, for instance, the company that distributed my 2 films, Play Nice, we wouldn't have been able to make Alex's War without some of the people in this room. So we're really glad of that. But I also think that we're on the precipice of even big Hollywood studios becoming corruptible, because the noise is getting louder and louder. And like I said, there's too much demand, and I am a firm believer in the open marketplace of ideas. I think that consumerism is the only thing that drives change, and I'm a capitalist, and I think that these people are going to get hip to it, and hopefully some of these smaller, independent-minded niche groups are able to survive and not, become totally corrupted once the big money, the gargoyles start to get into this.
No, I want to ask about Mars Review, and it's kind of a curious project because it's modeled after the New York Review of books, which has a certain rectangular format and a certain style. It itself was this weird moment when the whole New York Times Book Review was on strike, and they saw this opportunity to come in and take their market away. And so you have this thing that's in print, that's online, and you're making somewhat strange, interesting gestures, like having BAP's book, which came out of weird pickup artists and like bodybuilding forums, circulated through the bowels of the internet, was print on demand, and came out a few years ago, and now is getting reviewed by an alcoholic New York book critic who has no truck with the internet, and also like getting talked about by Red Scare, and unfortunately Anna couldn't make it because of weather and flights and children and so on. But so like, and then so there's this project of putting together the digital and the print and this few decades of history of New York Review, and a certain interest in like whatever's happening in like New York literary culture, which is both moribund and still important in some way. So I'm just kind of curious, like, what all these things are in play, like, why? What are you doing? I mean, I say this with kindness. It's like a curious question to me.
Yeah. Okay. The answer is sort of simple, but I think it points in a direction. It points to Urbit in a way. But the answer is simple, which is I just wanted to do a serious book review, right? And that's something that there used to be, at least a few of. I grew up reading old issues of the New York Review of Books. I feel like, I got an education in that way. If you read those issues from the early 1960s, it's just fantastic. And then around, I trace it to 2016, but obviously it's a longer process than that. I came to see that nobody was really occupying the higher ground, right? Everything that was on the higher ground was trickling down because basically these editorial boards were being run by Twitter. You don't want to publish something that's going to get a Twitter mob against you. You do want to publish something that's going to get a lot of retweets on Twitter. Even today I saw there's a very nice article about Urbit in a CoinDesk, and in a sort of meta-textual remark, the author says, and I have to mention Peter Thiel because for SEO optimization, if Peter Thiel's not in it, then it's not going to be searchable. So, this is happening to all magazines. I was seeing this happening to the New York Review, to the New Yorker, and so I thought, hey, if everybody's abandoning the higher ground, maybe that's a nice little niche to try to occupy. And now for me personally running it, maybe I have somewhat different interests from whoever the current editors are of the New York Review of Books, but I think that's also quite natural because there's a lot that's blossoming in these internet subcultures which to somebody in the legacy New York literary world simply do not exist and cannot exist. You could not talk about BAP in the New York Review of Books. It just wouldn't happen. You couldn't even write a negative review of it, right? It has to be shadow banned effectively. So that just seemed like a fantastic opportunity.
But you don't feel like that's all just changing right before our eyes this very minute? The New York Times wrote a piece on Paul Scalas. It's out of nowhere, out of the blue.
It's true. A lot's happened in the last couple years, even in the last year.
Do we have a James Pogue in the audience?
But,
hey, James, shout out.
Well, I would actually really love to hear your perspective on this because, how are you finding reviews and distribution for Alex's War? What are the pain points?
Well, that's less about me and more about him.
Well, no, but that's what I mean.
Alex
I'm
Jones
analogizing.
Is not Bronze Age pervert. Journalists scrape Twitter, scrape Tumblr, and they manufacture stories by stealing from anons.
Right. No, but I mean, like, is it not somewhat of a parallel case where, like, maybe certain people don't want to touch it simply because of the subject matter, regardless of what the perspective on the subject matter is?
I've only had one piece written about me in a legacy publication, and it was one of the most insulting things I've ever read. New York Magazine wrote a, I guess, review of going to my premiere, and they made me sound like a total idiot. They made everyone there sound like a total idiot, including Glenn Greenwald, who's one of the most brilliant journalists of, his generation. So, I haven't had the best experience, but the fact that they wrote it, the fact that they're, chumming up the waters with it, and that, even things that seem innocuous, like the piece about, like, the ion pack or something, it means that they know what's going on. And there's a lot of people, and of course, James's piece on the New Right, but, like, the fact that there's still a lot of people that are gonna get paid to pretend until it's totally safe. But I can tell you, without giving too much information, that behind the scenes, I get a lot. I mean, I get calls from people who are establishment people, and they're sitting on a little bit of a cultural volcano, and they haven't really figured out what to do with it yet, because the people who are still in the highest echelons of power are just ready to call anybody racist, and that's all that we're talking about here. There's just a bunch of people that are going to call anyone racist who's outside of, the mainstream narrative. And it sounds like a cliche or something you'd hear on Joe Rogan or something, but it's totally true. Everybody knows it. That's all that's happening.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I've gotten some of those emails too. I'm saying, like, wouldn't it just be fine if somebody, if not from one of those publications, but from a new publication that sort of usurps those, wrote in a dispassionate, non-slandering, non-ideological way about your fantastic film? Doesn't it deserve that,
Does my film deserve... Well, Variety wrote a nice review.
Okay.
No, there's been a lot of really talented people who have nothing to do with any of that shit who have written really great stuff about my work, and it's like massively encouraging, and I couldn't ask for any more than what I've received. I mean, I'm lucky to even be sitting here with, with you guys. I feel good. I feel great, and I think it is changing. I think everything's trending positive right now. I'm not like an apocalyptic person at all.
I think Alex is right. I mean, Penguin Random House just opened up an imprint for heterodox thinkers, and we all know what that's a dog whistle for, right? I mean, they see there's money on the table, like Alex said, and they want some of that money. It's not, they have no values, they have no principles. If they could sell stuff to the anti-woke set, they're gonna sell stuff.
I want to weigh in because I've been a book critic since the early 90s. I am, in fact, that mythical alcoholic New York book critic, except that I'm in recovery. Here's the truth. Let me tell you a story. The last book I reviewed for the New York Times Book Review, a vastly faded and emaciated mainstream book review, was of a book that they often come to me because I live in Montana and they don't think I know the gossip about the various writers, and so I'll be objective. And they gave me a book about marriage by a popular internet columnist. And I could tell she was popular among the New York Times reader. And I hated the book. I loathed it. I loathed the woman's portrait of her husband. I could hear it coming from my own wife's mouth, and I thought it was withering, and I decided to strike a blow for men. And in fact, that's partly true. But what happened was this. In reviewing this book, I attacked it for its aesthetic defects, its lack of humor, its shrill and rather juvenile humor, and so on. And I was hit by the Twitter mob. The Twitter mob, organized by the author of the book, with a feminist rubric for their hatred of me, because my sin was really that the book wasn't good and I said so, came after me. They enlisted an ex-wife of mine. They found various intimates and associates of mine who turned against me. And I saw the full force, not of cancellation, but of the kind of establishment taste-making monster aroused and angry. Because what I was supposed to do was quite different than what I did. Now, I have not yet been asked again to write for the New York Times, and I doubt that I will be. But I will say that the oppression that comes of knowing you are writing for an advertising-based magazine where the publishers themselves support through their ads the book review, and you are writing to an audience of rather rigid, though they don't think so, ideological parameters, is absolutely deafening, deadening, and I would never do it again. But I would happily review that book much more honestly than I was even able to in the New York Times for Noah. All he needs is readers. And he'll have more and more of them, and they'll be better and better. Because one problem we have in America is we want everything to get big, but we don't want it to get better. And I'd rather have it get better before it gets big.
I don't know who all is in the audience, but I'll just put this out there. I know two people who are trying to start heterodox publishing houses, and one for unaligned fiction, and another guy who sees the opportunity to buy the brand Schocken, which you might know, not republish Kafka, but publish new work under the shield of Schocken. So if that's something that you might want to help with, you should talk to me. Anyway, are we able to take questions? We have a mic in the audience because I think it might be a good time. Is that technically possible? Like, is there a mic that we can put out there? Or I can give my mic.
Hello. Censorship is an important issue. It's free discussion of how to build our society is kind of the basis of the American design. I'd be curious to know, any one of you who is, brave enough to comment on what you think of Andrew Anglin of the Daily Stormer. I read him regularly. I think he's one of the best, if not the best, of writers of our day in the news and commentary segment. And he was completely censored. If people who don't know the backstory, he was not only kicked off of Twitter and Facebook, he was kicked off of the internet. Google stole his domain name, and then a series of maybe 30-some countries, Iceland, Philippines, China again, Russia, the Soviet Union somehow took his website, which is defunct, but that's a lot of censorship. Is that coming to all of us? Maybe if they can do that to one person, couldn't they do that to anybody else? And I'd just be curious your thoughts.
I mean, look what just happened to Kiwi Farms. You're right. The Daily Stormer was not even the canary in the coal mine. We had gone way too far. Obviously, I do not support Andrew Anglin. I stand with Shanley. He's a terrible person, but he doesn't deserve to be censored.
That's a trippy question, dude.
Well, I estimate the percentage of feds in the audience to be at least 3%. So rather than answer the question directly, I'll do it over Urbit under my pseudonym. But
Lynn Mole Pitlex.
Yeah. Lynn Mole Pitlex, the memorable Lynn Mole Pitlex. I don't know. I don't read the Daily Stormer. I kind of know what it is. I have a half-assed notion that it's that it falls under the Nazi, Aryan, ultra-reactionary label for the normies. If it has virtues of its own that I don't know of, they can be pointed out to me in private. But on censorship in general, it always starts with the most hated. The bully always starts on the kid that is the least able to defend himself, that is the most disliked, that has the weirdest hair, that has boogers up his nose. They always start with that kid. And pretty soon they get to you. And they're coming damn close to me. And I've felt their breath. And I don't want it. And I have two choices. One, stop saying things that might be censored. Start fitting in, man. Wake up every day and find out what the new rules are and make sure to conform to them. But I know that I won't succeed. I know I'm not that good. I'm not that flexible. That my pride will at some time intervene, or my reverence for quality, or my affection for a person who has been canceled by the machine. So that's not going to work. Infinite plasticity and submission will only buy you 3 days and a half next year, okay? Right now it buys you 5, next year it'll be 3. The other option is to be rather absolutist about the question and force people who do the censoring to do it in public, shame them for it, point it out, and create an alternative in which it's not necessary. And that's, I hope, what many of us will try to do here.
And just, I mean, it would just be too obvious or it would stand out too much if I evaded a question that was about free speech and censorship. I'm a free speech absolutist, 100%, and that goes hand in hand with my belief, again, in the open marketplace of ideas. And I think that, you know, I'm an optimist, and I think that people will seek out the good, and they will gravitate towards what's good and interesting and constructive ultimately, and that provides the most solutions for people's lives. And I don't believe that people are naturally drawn to hateful speech unless it's somehow fetishized. So that's where I stand on that.
Which publication paid an Amish guy to pretend to be a Whig gnat? Can you tell us? Yeah. Like, who? You're a plant from who? Anyway, sorry, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just in general, I'm maybe less of a free speech absolutist. I don't know if we've ever had absolute free speech in any society, but that the sort of censorship you're talking about is a technical question. And you know, what's new today is that this is a battle that'll be fought on technical lines, and it's a technical problem, and there are technical solutions.
One last word. When I was onboarded to Urbit and saw its possibilities, my mischief mind went crazy. I suddenly went, I have the ability to use places to plant caches of contraband anywhere in the country and communicate privately with someone who picks them up. You know, I can do dead drops, I can arrange meetings, I can say things that are crazy. Suddenly I had my freedom back, and I was uncomfortable. Because in Prospect, I suddenly had to make decisions that I'm used to the Borg making for me. I suddenly had possibilities and options that I had long ago forgotten. And the ultimate evil of censorship is that it is the fertilizer for self-censorship. And I realized when I saw the possibilities of Urbit, the technical possibilities, not the theoretical ones, that I had lost whole limbs to self-censorship. I had lost whole dimensions of my personality. I had lost whole schemes that I had in boyhood that I gave up as technically impossible or illegal. And not that we're advocating illegality, we're not. But censorship is something that people internalize. It begins as a technical problem, but it ends as an emotional and intellectual problem. And we don't literally know who we are until we've been free to be something else.
Well, and what's happening now has created its own form of like mass psychosis, right? I mean, the self-censorship has almost become like a paralyzing condition for just the everyday people even. I don't know.
You guys are all awesome. My question is that the flip side of this argument around censorship or establishment media not giving the proper people or people that are doing good work attention or reviews or criticism, right? The flip side of it being that anytime an artist that is doing something avant-garde that gets ignored, it's censorship. And I feel like that same argument actually, goes to the detriment of the artists themselves and the culture at large. And I'm curious if any of you have any ideas of a solution where we can actually have a strong critical, the same kind of critical conversation that might have existed, at least what I remember in my early 20s, instead of it being this thing that it's all about, censorship and political correctness and stuff like that, that we can actually like discuss the work. I'm curious if any of you have any thoughts about that.
That's a good question. 'Cause, I mean, a lot of art just sucks, right? And it's not being censored. It just isn't good. I don't know what the solution is, but I mean, thank God someone's pointing that out.
I mean, broadly, the solution might be, if you look at the great modernist writers, for instance, you look at James Joyce, like, he wasn't writing Ulysses on spec because it would sell a lot of copies. He had a patron who was helping him through that. So, that's a broad way to think about it, is if something's a little stranger, or if something is not going to have mass market appeal, can it have a patron? And so how do you come up with, who deserves a patron, who doesn't? I don't know exactly, but you need to have a world and an artistic landscape with some variety, where everybody isn't playing the exact same game. When everybody's playing the exact same game, how can I get 1 million eyeballs? You end up with a very homogeneous landscape, and there's no way to even, separate the wheat from the chaff, I think.
See, the way the New York Times thinks of itself before it reviews a book is, we've spent 100 and whatever years accruing capital here. We've accrued an immense amount of prestige and energy, and our brand is charged with it. We're not going to give it away. We're not going to find an interesting book by Delicious Tacos named Pussy and give it the electric charge that the New York Times can without something in return. We're not going to get advertising from Delicious Tacos publisher. We're going to get hell from our subscribers. We're going to get cancellations from some of our advertisers. And all of that in return for doing this poor Anon the favor of conducting our electricity into his universe. There ain't no way they're going to do it. And not only are they not going to do it, they want to preserve their prestige as cool finders, as people who weigh in on what's good and what's bad. And in order to do that, they have to actively stamp out the Delicious Tacos of the world. Because should someone else find out that they wrote a good novel, and should that novel become a success in some fashion without us ever having recognized it, that hurts our prestige. And so we've actually got a contest going on between the gatekeepers of traditional culture and the originators of the new culture. They would rather you never happen because they aren't allowed to notice you. And yet, by not noticing you, should you get famous in another way, they begin to seem uncool, out of touch, not with it, and irrelevant. And so that's the stakes of the contest at the moment.
A question that I had was, where do you sort of see the future of quote unquote like heterodox publishing? I know that, like in Mars Review, it's not like everyone that's contributing is like dissident right leaning or anything. There are pretty ideologically diverse people who are writing in this sphere. Do you think, and like you mentioned Kat with the new sort of imprint from Random House, do you see a future in which those diverse sort of voices are able to be integrated into a more sort of mainstream publishing world, or do you always see it sort of siloed into always heterodox, always associated with the right, or you know what I mean?
I think a lot of us here wouldn't be right-wingers if the left wasn't in power. I'm a fundamentally oppositional character. I'm oppositional on principle. Give me something big, and I want to shoot slingshot rocks at it. If only because nothing should be too big and everything should be questioned. And so the notion that Urbit has fundamentally got an ideology is really an accident of where it's occurred in history, I think. We're facing a cultural consensus, and consensus is a big word these days. They act as though it's something good. And they act as though it's something we should all strive for, and that we should all bow before once it forms. And because Urbit is a fundamentally David-like figure against a Goliath, and the Goliath right now happens to have a certain ideological complexion, it is easy to think of Urbit as, in some sense, right-wing. But I think it's ultimately just institutionalized rebellion. And we shouldn't mistake where we are in history and versus the people who happen to inhabit the seats of power. I can guarantee you that Urbit would become a left-wing a platform should, there be a across-the-board takeover by the evangelical Christians of Wheaton, Illinois.
Everything needs an audience, right? So I think anything gets a marketing label. Whether that's necessarily right-wing coded, it's yet to be seen. But who's the audience? Who are you selling it to?
I would just sort of jump off of what Walter said in the last answer to answer your question. I think some people will be siloed, some people won't, and to get out of the silo, you gotta pay the toll, or however you want to think about it.
Hey guys, how much have you guys compromised your beliefs individually? How has that struggle been as an individual creative? And then was there a point at which you said, screw this, I'm just going to put my foot down and be myself? Could you each talk about that individually?
Okay. For me personally, I think that the culture wars of the last few years have basically illuminated things about myself that were always that way, that I just didn't really have a reason to consider it or think about it. Certainly up until fairly recently, in the last 10 years, I think about 10 years ago, maybe even a little bit less, I was just a typical Obama liberal, just sort of normie, kind of not really having to think about anything. And it wasn't until really, as I'm sure is the same for many people here, as soon as Trumpism happened, you started to realize that there were, two kinds of people in the world, and that there were people that, believed in mass prescriptions for everyone else, and people who don't. And so for me, I've always been a little rebellious, and this just put a fire under my ass to be more expressive and lean into my rebelliousness in a way that's meaningful and that helped other people where I didn't necessarily have a vehicle for that before.
Yeah, I feel very lucky not to have had to compromise my beliefs in making the Mars Review. I mean, there are always things outside of yourself that you have to contend with, whether, you know, you're the bravest person out there or the most extreme person out there, or whether you're the richest or the poorest or the most cowardly or whatever, right? But, you know, and everybody's going to make those decisions as they come. You know, the worst thing that can happen is death. That happens to some people for expressing their beliefs. I don't, you know, think we're anywhere near that. But, you know, so I don't feel like I've had to compromise them at all, but I'm aware that, you know, there are people apart from myself whose ideas matter, and, you know, there's such a thing as power, and power matters. And so I just, you know, navigate that as best as I can.
It's only as the opportunities to be myself have presented themselves in greater abundance that I realize retrospectively how much I compromised. In other words, what I thought of as successful, well-educated, popular, is all becoming another word for compromised in retrospect. Because I didn't know, to some extent, because there was no getting outside of the system for me, you know, who wrote for the New York Times, the New Yorker, New York Magazine, Harper's, New Republic, all the gold-plated consensus-building, manufacturing consent centers of American life. Did I think of myself as compromising? No, I thought of myself as doing well. I thought of myself as part of the conversation. But the forks that our culture has taken, largely because technology has allowed them to take it, have caused me to look back and go, dude, you were running with the herd and you thought you were leading it. You know, you thought you were speaking your mind, and you were speaking the hive mind. And so increasingly I attempt to, I guess, redeem myself for the compromises I didn't know I was making.
As for me, not really. People know me from my Twitter presence and my blog, so I haven't had the same opportunities to compromise even.
Yeah, and I just would offer to emphasize what Walter said, that, you know, the whole idea of being yourself, I'd question that. Like, I think that the war of art, the process of being like a better artist, is like continually questioning like what you think of as yourself and clearing out these blind spots you didn't know you had. And like my ideal for Urbit, like why I'm involved, is like not a very technical person, but like someone who was in the art and publishing worlds, is to clear out all these fucking obstacles so people can actually deconstruct themselves in more and more intense ways for, you know, many years of their career, so that their work becomes scarier and scarier to themselves. And it's just, yeah, you don't know the compromises you're making when you're making them, because it just seems like success, these words. Like, there's a whole frontier of possibility for self-creation and self inquiry that, you know, will create, maybe not Shakespeare, but like new kinds of art and literature for like the 21st, 22nd century. And like, to the extent that Urbit can like provide that neutral infrastructure, like that to me is, you know, why I'm involved with this. So.
Thanks, Sam. Actually, that leads right into my question. David Byrne wrote a book a couple years ago called How Music Works, where he made the argument that the technology of the musical instruments was inexorably tied to the architecture of the day. And he proved, at least to me, that art and technology are inexorably coupled. And so my question for the panel is, what technologies are you seeing now, not necessarily just Urbit, but in general for your own art form, and what are you excited about, and what do you think the possibilities for creation are?
I'll say I'm excited for new publishing houses. I think the art of making physical books has been lost by a lot of people in traditional publishing. I worked in traditional publishing. I can say, most of what's happening is you're just shipping the files to China and getting it made cheap. And I'm seeing a lot of people really try to reinvigorate book publishing with artisanal craft, and I find that incredibly exciting.
Hold for fire truck. And I could just keep going. Well, okay, so I mean, it's pretty much across the board that all these technologies have facilitated people becoming autodidactic, right? I mean, that's how we all got here. And especially with filmmaking, I think it's incredibly exciting for filmmaking because everybody can be a filmmaker now, and that sounds sort of like corny and milquetoast, but what it really means is that only the best of the best are going to get to see their work break through. And before, it had so much to do with nepotism and money and who could afford to go to film school, and people asked me for advice about filmmaking, and of course I didn't go to film school, although I would have liked to. And if you can learn how to edit a film, then you can make a film. It's a sort of a prosaic response, I know, but I just think that the level of competition that's possible makes it really exciting. And I'm especially looking forward to Generation Z and the films that they're going to come out with, because they seem a lot more ambitious ideologically than my generation, the millennials. So I think it's that filmmaking is going to really explode in the next few years.
A lot of people lament that there's not enough new stuff coming out. There's a lot of old things, right? There's a lot of things that get dredged up from the depths that are forgotten about, thanks to TikTok. I think TikTok's really great at reminding us of what we already have. And it's not just music, although it's definitely changed the way we consume music, but also food and makeup and toys. And for all the many issues with TikTok, I think that's a really cool thing, that curatorial bent. I mean, obviously people have questions about how the algorithms work, but I think it's awesome that songs that were recorded 60 years ago can come back and everyone knows what they are and they can assign their own stories and emotional resonance to them.
I want to say one thing that I kind of delivered a screed against mid-century mass culture in America, but it did have one virtue that I feel is endangered in the era of digital. And that was that when culture was physical, and this is to Noah's point about the physical book, when culture was physical, when it was instantiated in the physical book, or when the movie was a CD at a gas station on a shelf, you had the ability to come across it accidentally. You had the ability to interface synchronistically or serendipitously with the physical world. And I think it's very important that we stay conscious, though we're trying to program a digital culture, that it have a physical manifestation and links to the physical as well, because that is the area in which we can come across things by accident. That is the world in which we can be handed something that isn't just a link that we may or may not open, but an actual book which we feel a sense of respect for and ownership and want to open when we get back. So I actually think that the link up between something like Urbit and the publication of actual books is really important, because there is a danger that we get ourselves driven deeper into our own rabbit holes and bubbles without any exit route. And the exit route is IRL. And so if we keep a healthy interface between our digital and our physical lives such that they are cross-fertilizing and each one is doing what it does best. Urbit is offering secrecy, privacy, confidentiality, intimacy, but it's interfacing with a physical world which offers the richness of accident, propinquity, and synchronicity, then we'll do well.
How you going? So my question is based on the assumption that Urbit's ubiquity is just inevitable. And I think that the internal September event is going to be relatively soon. So the question is, how do you prepare for that? It's a relatively broad question, but I suppose if you had a lot of people who were the exact target market for Urbit, what would you teach them? But yeah, broadness.
I missed the first part of the question. Did you guys hear it?
No.
I'm Australian. We don't speak English. So, Urbit is going to be ubiquitous very soon. And I see the internal September event where everyone, it's like all of a sudden, like there's 1 million or more people on Urbit, like AOL back in the day. And I see that as happening very, very soon. So the question is, how do you prepare for that? So what do you have people learn? If you have a lot of people who are in a really good state of mind, what do you teach them? But that's just like that's one segment of it. So yeah, just interested in broad thoughts on it.
Well, okay, so a large part of the answer to that is going to be from the technical side. And so, you would want to talk to some of the engineers who are building Urbit. But the one thing I can say is Urbit was absolutely built with Eternal September in mind, with the idea in mind that all previous platforms have fallen to this phenomenon. For people who don't know, Eternal September is a term that means like basically when all the normies get onto the platform and ruin it. That's sort of a caustic summary. But, Urbit was built in order to be extensible so that people could, separate communities, branch off, and that it can absolutely flourish with, hypothetically in the future with an arbitrarily large number of users.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a technical question, but there is a sense in which Urbit's meant to be a network of networks, and the scale, it's like a network of villages, with strong gatekeeping possibilities and a number of subcultures. The upside and the downside of that is that you don't know everything that's happening on the network. You know what's happening with your friends and what they hand you and what they tell you about and what you stumble across. This is actually much more natural than the Google world, where you can enter a keyword and supposedly search every page on the internet, even though that's obviously not true. We're not really built to go down every rabbit hole. It's information overload and it's doom scrolling. It feels horrible, like physically horrible, and we're all used to, being inside Wikipedia or on Twitter or some feed for hours and what the fuck just happened. There is an interesting question of when Urbit develops a little bit more, can we build an actually sophisticated social graph? Sorry, music. That could support larger than small groups interacting in a way that feels humane. I think that's an unsolved question that Urbit might provide the tools to be able to solve in a way that, I think about Facebook and I have, 800, 1,200 Facebook friends, and 40 of them are my actual friends, so I don't post anything there. It would be there a way to have 1,200. It's an unsolved question, but it's an important one. I think there's going to be a lot of energy put toward that.
I'm curious. curious why you think it's imminent. Like, why wouldn't people go to the Fediverse instead? I'm not trying to be a dick here. I'm sorry, all my love to Urbit.
Sending you good vibes as well, So there's no way to prime you for what I'm about to say, so I'll just say it. But pornography is really bad for individuals, peoples, and society. Like it's poo-poo, it's pee-pee. It's like, and fortunately, if you approach it in the right way, if you want to quit it, then it is like, it's easy to quit, right? Like zero willpower approaches are like, so I run easypeasymethod.org. Like if you know anyone from like back in the day, I'm the Vocaroo guy, like Talal, yeah. But so essentially I get like 70,000, 80,000 people a month going to this website, and No Nut November is just around the corner. I'm going to try to get media attention and whatnot. So when everyone reads this book, I'm going to say, hey, like let's pay attention to like what's happening in society real quick. It's real bad. And then, and I can't give you like an exact blueprint solution because that's like any ism is bound to fail. But I can at least give you a foundation of Urbit. I can at least say, at least whatever future we craft, it's going to be better on Urbit. And that's like just that's what I want to do. And then I want to get people to grow food in their homes because I reckon that's cool too. But the question is like, what do I teach people so that I could you can sculpt the culture onto Urbit and have like so I just see it as inevitable. Thanks.
So how can magic or techomancy or simply broad metaphysics in conjunction with art or subcultures mirroring digital culture play a role in breaking this mass psychosis you discussed? Can we induce mass recall of karmic metempsychosis through the generation of mimetic spirituality?
I can try to glancingly answer the question, which is, I think variety is absolutely better than homogeneity, right? And and you can't really prove that, right? So, like a utopian might be okay if everything's homogeneous, everything's good. You can imagine such a utopia, but I think that what Urbit provides the roots for is for a world in which variety is possible and in which some of the phenomena you were speaking about could take root.
I think it was, how can magic... Could you repeat the question? We can't really hear you, that's the problem. You have to shout. I mean, speak up, because it's hard to hear.
How can magic or technomancy, or simply broad metaphysical concepts, in conjunction with art or subcultures, mirroring digital cultures, play a role in breaking the mass psychosis you mentioned earlier? And can we induce mass recall of karmic metempsychosis through the generation of mimetic spirituality? In other words, can we use Urbit or the internet to induce a spiritual change on broad general levels? And is spirituality important in this?
We're doing it right now. It's happening right now.
+1.
I think that happens anyway, but people aren't allowed to talk about it. And we can talk about it. I don't want to repeat, though, the mistake of thinking that we're dark wizards who are going to reprogram the human soul from some headquarters somewhere. To me, the necromancy or the mystic engineering and re-engineering of society is the project of the people that I'm trying to evade at the moment. And as much as I imagine a grandiose future in which the galaxy owners of Urbit are, also sort of wizards and dukes of human spirituality, I would fear that possibility, because our current version of reality, as given to us by the current crop of magicians, shows, I think, the limits of priestcraft in technology.
I think that's a good place to end. There's some parties later.